Hi everybody, thank you for joining us. My next guest today is Mr. Mike Covell, and we've got lots of questions for him. I hope you get involved and comment and ask your questions also. And here he is. Hello.
Hello.
Firstly, thank you very much for agreeing to joining us today. It's very much appreciated. And you being part of our first virtual event. And we've already been having a little bit of a chat, and I've already you've already started answering a question before I'd even had to ask it. So we'll get straight into it. Firstly, we were just chatting about your articles, and I was just talking to you about you writing for Haunted Magazine. So if we talk about Haunted Magazine first, and then we'll move on to all your other articles, because you've written so many, so for so many different genres. So how long is it you've been writing for Haunted Magazine now?
Oh, it's a good few years now. Yeah, I mean, I can't honestly remember how long it's been, but it was great. I mean, they just approached me and said, do you fancy writing an article? It came at a time when 39 Grey Street was making a lot of newspaper headlines, and people had got caught up in kind of this fake history surrounding the venue, and I'd written a couple of articles about the factual side, the real history, and they just weren't getting viewed. People were just ignoring them, and Haunted Magazine came along and said, let us publish the real history. So I said, yeah, sure. So I wrote it up as an article, and we've never looked back, really. It's been fantastic. It's great working for the guys. It's a fantastic team.
And you've got we're not going to discuss it because I don't want to get into trouble. I don't want to get fired, basically. But you have got an article in issue 27, which is released on Wednesday next week.
Yes, there is an article in there.
And you've written for, you've also had a lot of articles in different newspapers as well, haven't you?
Yeah, it's weird that the first article I ever wrote was for a magazine called Ripperologist magazine, which was about Jack the Ripper. And off the back of that, I got offers for other true crime magazines. So I started out kind of writing about true crime and you know, serial killers, murderers, that kind of thing. And then I published my books. And off the back of that,
I got a lot
question.
Did the articles come first and then the book?
The articles came first.
Right, okay.
Then I self-published. In the space of a couple of weeks, I had offers from a company in America who wanted to buy the rights to 4 of my books. Off the back of that, I got a publisher. And then within a couple of weeks of my first book being published, the local newspaper came to me and said, would you like to write for us? And basically, I kind of work freelance. So technically, I don't work for the newspaper. I work for an agency, and I write my articles and send them to various newspapers, and if they publish them, I get paid. If they don't publish them, I don't get paid. But what I do at the end of every year is I put them in a big book and release them as a collected works of. And it's great. I mean, since then, I've written for newspapers in Hull, East Yorkshire, Beverley, Grimsby, North Yorkshire, all over. And then some of the bigger articles have made it into sort of the Daily Mirror, the Times, the Express. You know, so it's been really, really big. And on top of that as well, a lot of magazines have been approaching, and I've written for various magazines and stuff like that as well.
Like I say, yeah, because I was looking and reading. Did you recently have an article? I'm sure I read it, that you had an article in the newspaper just recently.
Yeah, I think the latest one, the latest one that was in the Hull Daily Mail was about Lewis Carroll. That I'd written. That was about a nightclub in Hull that had links to Lewis Carroll and his family. But on average, I'd say there's 3 or 4 articles a month in the newspapers, and then at least an article a month in various magazines. On average, I write about 8 articles a week.
Wow.
And send them off to various agencies and stuff like that. So it's great because, I mean, during lockdown and stuff like that, it meant I could work from home. And send articles all over the place.
So where do you normally work from? Do you have an office that you normally work from?
This is my office in my house. And As you can see, it's full of research and various boxes.
Just a little bit.
Yeah.
And you've actually, is it over 30 books you've had published?
Yeah, over 30. You can see them all behind me, all on the shelf. Over 30 books published. I've actually finished 10 that are currently sat with the publisher and they're waiting to be published. And then today
10.
I've been working on a few more. Yeah, 10 that I've completed fully, and they're all ready to go. They're all packaged up and everything and ready for release. So
anyone that's not familiar with your books, can you just explain what it is you tend to write about?
Well, I started off writing about Jack the Ripper, and the idea was I wanted to release a single Jack the Ripper book, and I'd written so much that it couldn't be published as a single book. It was just too big. So I split 1 into 2, and then 2 into 4, and then 4 into 8, and never really looked back. And I'm the kind of person that will sit and read and think, well, maybe there's more to that story. Maybe there's something there that people don't quite understand. And I'll go away and research it myself, and I'll uncover new stuff in various archives and speak to eyewitnesses and just get so much information and just think, this deserves to be told. This story is waiting to be told, and the truth needs to be told. And so, that's how it works for me.
Wow. Yeah, because you do a lot of it also. You've been on radio and so on as well, haven't you, in the past as well? Is that
yeah,
correct?
Well, again, that started, I did some work for the BBC. Again, it was about Jack the Ripper. And they came back to me about ghost stories and cryptozoology and ufology. So I've done a lot of work with the BBC over the years. The last thing I did with them was Infinite Monkey Cage with Professor Brian Cox. It's on the BBC iPlayer, and it's basically a show about various things, but in this particular show we covered UFOs. So they came here and they filmed at my house, and then they went and filmed on location, and it was great because Professor Brian Cox is quite a skeptic. I got to work with Lucy Beaumont, who is a Holborn comedian who was absolutely lovely, and also her mum, Jill Adams, who is a playwright. So I got to work with them, and it was a great laugh. Then after working with the BBC, I got other offers as well. I ended up on Most Haunted. I did an episode of Most Haunted. That was filmed in Hull. Then they called me up and said, would you like to come in and work in the studio on Most Haunted Live? And I jumped at the opportunity. It sounded glamorous. And when I got there, it was in the back of a lorry in the middle of Pontefract, and we did 30 East Drive. That show went out live on Halloween in 2015.
I'm sure I watched that.
Yeah, I was sat in the studio freezing. I'd wore a suit to look nice, and I was absolutely freezing cold. And then off the back of that, I got offered a place on Paranormal Lockdown with Nick Groff and Katrina Weidman. And again, I went back to Pontefract, and again, it was all about 30 East Drive. So I worked on that with them. And then I did a documentary on Jack the Ripper. That was an Australian production, but I proofread the script. I featured in the show, did a lot of research for that. So that was great fun.
Where can people find that?
The Jack the Ripper one is still on YouTube. It's called Prime Suspect Jack the Ripper. It's still available on YouTube for people to watch. That must have been about 10 years ago, so I looked really young in that one.
Really?
And then I did World War II Treasure Hunters with Suggs from Madness, which was great fun. He was a great guy and such a laugh. I did a couple of World War II documentaries for the BBC about Hull. And then just recently I did one called Killer Neighbours, which was about murderers and stuff like that. That was for the Crime Channel in America. Filmed with the Travel Channel. We did a documentary called Monsterlands, which aired in America but never came over in the UK. Did work with Vice TV. And appeared on Paul Ross's radio show as well, with Paul Ross talking about various aspects of history. So all over the place, really.
So how did all this begin for you in the first place? With the writing?
Basically, when I was 8 years old, I saw a light in the sky from my bedroom window, and it looked like a giant egg. The following morning, I kind of said to my dad, I've seen something, I don't know what it is. I can't quite explain it. And my dad gave me a book called The Unexplained. And it was, I don't know if you remember it, it was a Partworks magazine by Orbis. And at the end of every year, you got this folder and you put all your magazines into the folder. And he had all these on a shelf. And he gave me the first volume. And there was kind of a flow chart, which you read through. and it says what you've seen might be something called a UFO. So I just kind of said to my dad, what's a UFO? And my dad gave me another book. And from there, basically, I read up on, I think I spent the full weekend reading this entire collection of books on cryptozoology and ufology and the paranormal. And, and it really got me hooked. So I used to say to every Christmas, my dad would say, what do you want for Christmas? And I'd say things like, UFO books, ghost books, that kind of weird stuff. So I started building up a collection, and me and my dad as well used to collect newspaper clippings on various things and all this kind of stuff. So that's what you can see behind me is all the newspaper clippings and research. And then life kind of got in the way, and I went to college. I ended up with a few jobs, and I got married, and I ended up working full time in retail management. I was looking after staff. I had a shop, and then 14 years ago, I was diagnosed with a critical heart condition. And my doctor basically said, you're not going to be able to go back to work. There's an opportunity here for you because, unless you have an heart operation, you might die. So I ended up giving up full-time work. You're waiting around for doctor's appointments and you're sat in waiting rooms all the time. And I started reading everything I could get my hands on about local history, Jack the Ripper, ghost stories, UFOs. And I thought to myself, there's a big gap of knowledge that is unknown, where people don't really know about these particular things. And so at that point, I put pen to paper and started writing a draft for a book about the history of Hull, really, where I live. And the idea was it would look at the connections to Jack the Ripper in Hull. And then from there and there, it kind of grew and grew and grew. I had 2 art operations, and by that time, I'd finished 5 manuscripts that were ready for publication. Eventually, I got the all clear to go back to work. I applied for lots of jobs, and no one would take me on because of the heart situation. So I ended up starting my own business. And it just, from there, I ended up with international clients, writing for companies all over the world, working on media productions all over the world, working with, it's just been amazing. Never really looked back. So it's just kind of grown and grown and grown. And I'm a firm believer in fate. I do believe things happen for a reason. I do believe at the time I didn't see that, but now I totally believe in it.
Got some questions for you. Tasha Brown, she's also an author. She's asking, has your genre always been paranormal? Do you prefer to write at what takes your interest at that time, in the moment?
The paranormal has been
yeah, go on.
Yeah, it's been a major. The paranormal's been a major interest. Local history's always been a major interest for me, but unsolved true crime as well. So what I tend to do is I tend to kind of juggle. I might write for a week on a unsolved murder case, and then once you start going through autopsy reports and things like that, and it gets a bit dark and it can drag you down a little bit, you get so heavily invested, I'll shove that to a side for a couple of weeks and maybe concentrate on a ghost book. And then after a week of that, I might put that to a side and work on a UFO book. And I kind of juggle the projects I'm working on. So it keeps me fresh. And as well, it's all about the research that's available to you. Sometimes you have to order files and it can take days, weeks, even months before that research is available. At the moment, I'm working on a brand new UFO book, and I've had to put in freedom of information requests to Humberside Police, and they can take some time to come through. So while that's going on, I'm concentrating on a book about ghosts. So it's just a juggling process, really. It's why I end up writing so many books.
Because you've got so many different interests and so many different things you can write about. I suppose for an author, really, you're in quite a lucky position, the fact that you've got so many different interests, so you can write about so many different things. Sorry, I got more coming up. Liz wants to know, is there any location you've investigated or researched you feel a connection with? That's a good question.
Yeah, that is a good one. There's been a few, actually, where I've kind of gone, and I remember a few years ago I went to Burton Agnes. I've just finished writing a book about the Screaming Skull of Burton Agnes Hall. And part of that was that I spent a lot of time in Burton Agnes Hall researching the property, the people that lived there, the genealogy of the people that lived there, the history of the property. And I just became really attached to the place and spent a lot of time there. And it just felt like home. When I went in, people would would say hello to me and talk to me, and you walk around the grounds, you get a feel for the place and its history. So that has had a really good connection. But yeah, I mean, there's been so many places where I've gone and really felt kind of an affinity for the place. And as well, when you research the people that live there and their stories and stuff like that, you kind of, I'm the kind of person that takes it to heart. So I feel a real connection to the people in these places and their history. And I think that helps when you're on an investigation, because you can ask questions that are quite personal, and especially if you've got clients with you and they're coming up to you and saying, we've got a feeling that this or this or this, and you as an historian, you can stand there and say, you're along the right lines, and I don't like to give too much away when I'm on investigations to people, and I let them come up with stuff. But yeah, there's been some wonderful locations that I've visited over the years that have left a real impact on me. So many.
More questions, they're all coming in now. John would like to know, out of all the subjects you cover, ufology, the Ripper, cryptozoology, etc., which is your favourite?
It's difficult, actually. My wife turned around to me recently and said, "You're obsessed with Jack the Ripper," and I said, that's kind of the wrong word to use, because that is kind of an emulation of a serial killer. That's not.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's a bit of a worrying word to you.
Yeah, so I've spent a lot of time researching Jack the Ripper, a lot, and that's all. I mean, a lot of that's about the Victorian period, about the police, the press. I absolutely love the history of British newspapers, so I spent a lot of time researching newspapers in the Victorian period. So that has been a massive part of what I do. I spent many years working with sort of ghosts and stuff like that, so that kind of the paranormal really interests me. The cryptozoology is kind of interesting, because those kind of stories, when you write about those, they become massive. People love those stories, but at the same time, to get those stories, you're spending a lot of nights in cold, wet, awful environments, looking for big cats and looking for evidence. So the part of cryptozoology where you're indoors and it's nice and warm, I like that bit. When you're outside in the pouring rain, it's not so nice. But yeah, I mean, we've recently done a sky watch in North Yorkshire, which was great fun. And I like UFOs, and so it is difficult picking one of them subjects.
Okay. Another question from John. He wants to know, who was Jack the Ripper in your view? As you just mentioned Jack the Ripper again, I had to ask the question.
A bit of a tough one, really. I don't have a particular suspect. I found that when people have suspects, they get sort of tunnel vision, and they kind of rule out other pertinent evidence, and ignore vital evidence, and only choose evidence that supports their suspect. So there's a lot of people that I study. I mean, in the past, I've written extensively about 14 suspects with links to Hull, and that I've done the genealogy and the research and spoke to family members and been given access to personal papers and stuff like that, and I found that side of it absolutely fascinating. But to say I don't really have a particular suspect that I would say he was Jack the Ripper, because there's just not enough evidence to support that theory, really.
It is one of those things in history that it's one of those, I suppose is that why you find unsolved cases interesting? See, I quite like watching these programs about unsolved cases and things like that, because I do find them really interesting, and it just really makes you wonder, who were these people, who did these types of things, and how have we never found out who they are? Obviously, it's a bit different Victorian times and so on. It's not like you can go back and find out or anything, and you can look up the history and the case files and so on, because back it was very different then. It was very limited resources, whereas now it's completely different.
Yeah.
But I find these unsolved mysteries really interesting. I'm just reading the comments. Agreed on, this is John, agreed on Jack. It's never going to be solved, and that's what makes it so fascinating. I love the subject. So he's with you on that.
Yeah.
At least he didn't say he's obsessed with it. But yeah, like I said, is there anything you haven't written about which piques your interest that you'd like to at some point, but obviously you're so busy and you've got so much going on and so many stories already. Is there one particular subject that you've touched on in the past, but you've never actually written about in an article or done a story or something else that piques your interest?
At the minute, I can't really think of any. Yeah, I mean, I've written. I mean, if you go back through my back catalogue of what I've written for sort of the whole Daily Mail, I've covered pretty much every aspect of Hull, from history to unexplained stuff to true crime to UFO sightings, ghost sightings, big cat sightings. So I've written all sorts for them, covering all these different kind of aspects of Hull's quirky history. So there's nothing that I've not really covered with them. But every now and again something pops up, and if it's interesting to me, I'll sit and read it and then think, what else is there? What is known about this, or what is not known? And then I'll go away and start doing the research. And even when I'm researching stuff that I want to research, so for instance, the past week I've been researching a new UFO book. Just this morning, while I was waiting, I was researching some files in the Ministry of Defence, and I was researching some files on North Yorkshire UFO sightings when I came across a file in the National Archives that was about a North Yorkshire ghost sighting. And that was quite interesting because you don't usually get ghostly stuff in the UFO files. So that sent me off on a tangent where I was looking for corroborating evidence and stuff like that. So it does happen a lot. Usually when I'm not concentrating, I find stuff out that I think that's interesting. I might write about that.
So we were lucky to have back last year at one of our physical events, we had Dave from the Birmingham UFO group chairman. He joined us and did a 2-hour talk for us. I think it wasn't an hour, 2 hours. He probably could have done 2 hours, but he did a talk for us last year. So that's something that I've just recently, only like in the less than 12 months, started looking into and finding interest in. And we've got someone that does a live for us, and his lives are all about, not always about UFOs, but all his lives are about all the unexplained things. I'll put you in contact with him because I'm sure they'd probably like to interview you. He'd like to interview at some point. And in John and Russ, they do the Bizarre Dimensions show. So I'm sure, yet again, they're quite in. John, who's asking the questions, I'm sure he'd be interested in discussing more with you and talking to you more about different subjects. I'm going to get on with another question from Liz. Have you ever been starstruck when you have met anyone during all of your different research for specific subjects?
Yeah, I mean, it's weird. It's because I've worked with so many lovely people, and I mean, things like when I first met Suggs, I was quite sort of, I mean, I'd grown up listening to Madness. So to meet him was fantastic. And he's such a down-to-earth guy. It was so funny. And we spent most of the shoot just laughing, just giggling in the background like a pair of kids. We were telling each other jokes and stories. The first time I met Yvette and Carl off Most Haunted. They were absolutely lovely, and we've become really good friends. I worked with Yvette again just recently this year at a conference. So they were lovely. They were really, really nice. So yeah, I mean, even just down to daft things. When I worked with, when I was on Most Haunted Live, I met Rylan from the X Factor, and he just came.
Not someone you'll meet every day.
Yeah, he just came over and introduced himself and said, you're Mike the historian, and we got chatting. He was lovely, and Paul O'Grady was so funny, such a nice guy, and to be able to sit with him and chat with him before the show and then afterwards as well, it was such a lovely, such a nice, down-to-earth guy, and when you go to these, I'm always nervous, always. Yet when I'm there, they make you feel so at home. And we just have a laugh. And the great thing is about working with these people, they all have a genuine passion for the subject matter. So when I worked with Suggs, he was so knowledgeable about the Second World War. And when I worked with Yvette and Carl, they were bringing up case studies and talking about the history behind them and all sorts. You don't really get to see that on TV. And it's a shame, really, because it just shows how passionate people are. I remember when I met Nick Groff, Nick came over and shook my hand, and he mentioned
my next question. Because like I've met Katrina, but I've not, and she's so down to earth. She's lovely. My husband and I actually had lunch with her, and we just chatted about, we didn't even really chat about paranormal. We chatted more about normal stuff, about like she's married now, but at the time she was engaged to be married, and about where she was going to have her wedding. And, you know, it was just really weird. It was like we knew her. It was really strange, because some people, like, that was probably my starstruck moment for me, was meeting her. And I suppose when you meet these people, you forget that they're just normal people like you.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember when we was filming Paranormal Lockdown, the producer was on his phone to his little boy, and we was filming in All Saints Church in Pontefract. And if you've ever seen it, it's kind of a bombed out church that was bombed during the English Civil War. It's kind of a shell of a church, really. And he was showing his little boy, who was in America, and he was saying, "Look at this. This is a British church." And his little boy, thought it was a castle, and that was lovely. And and I got to say hello to his little boy. And then as soon as we started filming, Nick came over to me. The idea was they would walk up to me and introduce themselves, and I would introduce myself, and we'd get kind of an establishing shot. And Nick walked up to me and just straight away told a joke. That, and that was it. Everyone was laughing, and you've got the producer in your earpiece telling you to get serious, and they've not got a lot of time to get in the bag, and we're just giggling like kids, and it was great. We sat in the churchyard talking about Jack the Ripper and Whitechapel and all sorts, and they were so nice. And I just spoke to Nick the other day. We were messaging each other on social media and chatting about stuff. So really down to earth guys, and lovely to work with. Is
there anyone you haven't worked with as of yet that you'd like to? I've got to ask you that.
Yeah, Josh Gates. Josh Gates, who did Expedition Unknown, Destination Truth. He used to be the compere on the live Ghost Hunters shows many years ago. I've always been a fan of Josh Gates. I've got his books. The guy's a legend in my opinion, just because the stuff that he investigates is just so wide. They started off doing kind of cryptozoology and ghosts, and then it went into UFOs, and then it went into kind of lost civilizations and lost treasures and everything. And he's kind of he has the dream job, in my opinion. And even my kids will sit and watch his shows endlessly. So, yeah, Josh Gates, definitely.
That's great that you've got a common interest, though, isn't it, with your children as well? And they are, you're educating them for their future as well.
Yeah, well, I've taken them to photo shoots, and they've seen how the process works, so they get to see back scene and stuff like that. So there's quite a well-known picture of me where it's sort of lit from below, where my face looks quite evil, and that was used in a lot of newspapers when I first started out. And it was my eldest at the time. He'll have been 7 or 8. He basically lit that for us. He was sat under the table with the light in and held it for us while we got the picture and stuff like that. So I do try and include them as much as possible so they get to see. And then we'll watch the shows together, and we'll talk about them and things like that. And, sometimes I can come down on a night and they'll be sat watching Ghost Adventures, or, they do watch stuff like that and they really enjoy it. So
that was, do you ever watch yourself, on different shows and everything? Because some people say that they just can't bring themselves to watch themselves on programs they've been in and so on. So just out of interest, do you watch the shows you've been in?
Once. That's it. It was difficult for Most Haunted Live because it was streamed live, so I never...
Yeah, obviously, yeah.
People were watching that at home. We recorded it and I had to watch it the next day. The only one I've not watched, I worked on a TV show some years ago called The Bombs That Changed Britain. And basically I was the researcher on that show. I spent 6 months researching behind the scenes. We filmed in Hull City Centre. And when the show came out, I remember in the 6 months in the run-up to the show, because I was researching, victims, basically, of mass bombing, I was coming out of the archives in tears. It physically changed me. And I remember when the show came on, I said to my wife, I can't watch it. I can't bring myself to watch it. And I remember I sat on social media instead and gauged the reaction. And people from across the city, grown-ups, were saying we're in floods of tears because it was such a poignant production and they really did it justice. You see, Hull got really badly bombed during the Second World War and it was ignored. It wasn't called Hull in the press. It was called a northeast coastal town. And since then, whenever they make a documentary, they always ignore Hull. So this was one of the first documentaries to really tackle Hull's bombing and really talk about the victims. So, it hit a nerve, and people were really emotional by it and still mention it to this day. And it was a great product. The team were fantastic. We really looked after each other, and lovely production to work on, but quite harrowing at times.
John again. Another case that he's really interested in is the Highgate vampire from the 60s and 70s at Highgate Cemetery, London. Have you ever looked at this case? It's another with many sightings and yet never solved.
Yeah, what fascinating. It's one of them cases that I'd love to sink my teeth into. But yeah, I mean, Highgate Cemetery anyway is a beautiful cemetery. It is a beautiful location. I've seen and read two sides of the story. There's one side of the story that says it was this, a vampire, basically. And there's other sides of the story that say it was mass hallucination and a lot of coincidences linked together. And it's just one of those stories where there's so many twists and turns and fascinating. I watched a documentary recently, I think it was on YouTube, where they'd actually gone to the locations and filmed at the locations that are mentioned in the text. And just to see them was fantastic and quite fascinating. But yeah, it is an interesting case. And I mean, I love stuff like that.
Tasha wants to know, have you ever gone anywhere for research and been completely blown away by it?
Yeah, a few places. I remember, I remember when I was writing about Jack the Ripper, I had to go to the British Library. And if anyone's ever been to the British Library, if you can imagine a football field full of books, and it was just amazing. I was just blown away by the size and scope of it. So in terms of that kind of research, that blew me away. On another project I worked on a book about a gentleman called Edwin Brough. And Edwin Brough was a bloodhound breeder that lived in a place in Scolby on the outskirts of Scarborough.
I was about to ask you, where's that?
Yeah, today it's a restaurant. You can go and sit and have fish and chips in there. But he built that as his house. And in the backyard, he's got all these lovely Victorian dog kennels. So I basically arranged to go along, and I had fish and chips, and then I went and had a look at the dog kennels. And they basically just said, go wherever you want, and left me up to it. And it was just being there, just standing in history, was just wonderful. And as well, whenever I go to Whitechapel in London, and I get off the train, I know my way around Whitechapel better than I know my way around the western side of the city of Hull. And it's just being there in that history. You're kind of walking in the footsteps of the victims and of Jack the Ripper, but also other things as well. I mean, the Crays are associated with the area, so there's a lot to see in that area. And it just every time I go, it just blows me away. I love it in the East End of London.
Okay, sorry, I got distracted there. I was literally just listening to you. I just listened to you talk. And forget I need to participate in the conversation because it's really interesting. So have you got anything in the pipeline for this year? Have you been anything you can talk about that you've been approached about for production purposes? Do you find a lot of production? I know you can't probably tell us because I know anything to do with TV, you're not allowed to give any information. Obviously, myself and my husband working for Jane, we know that because obviously when she does the shows, her and Barry and Chris and that, they're not allowed to tell us anything, or even like when they're going filming and all the so on and the rest of it, you're not allowed to give information. But I should imagine because of your vast knowledge about so many different subjects, you get approached quite a lot for like I said, newspapers, magazines, radio. Obviously, you've been in productions previously. Have you ever? Okay, two questions in one now. Sorry. Have you ever thought about producing something yourself?
Yes. I've been approached to work on a documentary series based on my books, basically. Mike Covell Investigates. Some years ago, we approached a company with an idea to produce a TV show. The company greenlighted that. And then behind the scenes, we got a production crew involved. There was a lot of squabbles within the production crew. It just never happened. So it's one of them things where it's in production hell. So this particular one, I've been I've been approached to work on that. A couple of other shows have approached me for later in the year. I can't say too much on them at the minute, but
no, like I said, I know that.
I've got meetings due with them. I've got meetings this week actually coming up on Wednesday with big organisations to do projects in the future. So we'll just see how it goes. I mean, I never say never, and I'm open to any offers. And I'm blessed in that I've been so far able to work on such wonderful productions. But yeah, there is so much secrecy. And when we did Most Haunted, we filmed it a week before Christmas, and it didn't air while it must have been around April, May time. And all that period, I wasn't allowed to tell anyone what I'd done and where I'd been. And so, I mean, that was a really frustrating, but you can appreciate why. When I did Most Haunted Live, nobody knew, apart from my wife, where I was going. And everyone was sworn to secrecy. I'd signed a contract. And I remember I got onto the set, and basically what they did was they had a double-decker bus, and the upstairs of the double-decker bus, they basically said, this is where you can chill out and have something to eat and drink and relax. And there was a big neon Most Haunted sign, and I was sat in front of it just having a drink of water, and my friend who had taken me in his car took a picture of me and uploaded it onto social media. And I didn't know, because I'm just sat there on the bus, and my wife called me and she said, there's a picture of you on the set of Most Haunted. I decided to say to him, take it down quick. So he took it down, and thankfully nobody saw it. So when I came on the show, obviously you get people taking pictures of the TV and tagging you in. Did you know you're on this? Well, yeah, I was sat there. So, but yeah, great fun.
Like, so that's the thing with production and everything. You are sworn to secrecy. You're not allowed to talk about anything until actually it's come out, are you? Because it's all in your contracts and everything. Cause I know that some people they will post on social media about they're doing something and so on, and they give details. You're like, well, you're not allowed to give details because obviously you're under contract and you're not allowed to talk about anything. And if you do talk about anything prior, you are in breach of contract, aren't you? They can just pull you from the show, basically.
Exactly. Yeah. So you've got to be really careful. You know, I remember when I got my production pack through for Most Haunted Live, and the first page it says the talent, you know, and it's got Yvette Fielding and Paul O'Grady and Ryle, and then my name was on there. And I was really shocked by that. I was like, it must be a mistake, you know. And I remember when I pulled up into the production village, and the security guard looked at the car and said, you know, you can't come in here, to my driver. And my driver said, I've got Mike in the passenger seat. And the guy looked through at me and said, I'm really sorry, Mike, go straight through. And that to me was a bit surreal because, you know, I'm just a normal down to earth guy, you know, and having people drive you to locations and having people carry your bags for you. You know, I'm from Hull. I carry my own bags, you know. It's weird. I remember I got picked up once to go do a shoot. And I had this lovely big black car, blacked out windows, and it came to my doorstep. And I got in the front seat. And the driver was like, what are you doing? And I was like, sitting in the front seat. He was like, you're supposed to sit in the back. I was like, I've never done this before. There's no rules or regulations on, you know, where to sit and things like that. It was all new to me. You know, and we drove there chatting about family and everything, really. And lovely guy. You know, he must have thought, what the hell is going on here, you know? But yeah, I mean, so many fascinating projects I've worked on, and they've always been so much fun.
Like I say, you've had such varied production, like with your TV shows, Amazon, radio. How do you have time to fit all these different things in? And not only that, how do you have time to actually write anything, like book-wise, when you're doing so much? It's like, sure, I just don't understand. There can't be enough hours in the day, surely. I don't know how you manage to find all this time to do all of this.
I take a laptop everywhere, you know, and so I write, you know, when I'm sat down between stuff, I'll write. So I'm always writing. And then if I've not got my laptop, I've got my tablet. So I can write on that and it goes to the cloud, and then I can get that when I get back home. You know, and the same when I go to the archives, I always got a laptop with me or a tablet so I can write and stuff like that. It's all about juggling. It's all about arranging stuff. You know, this week I've got some major meetings, and I've spent a lot of time juggling them so that I can go to one meeting, then go to another. And I've tried to squeeze them all in on the same day so that I only have to make one trip into the city centre during the day. I mean, the rest of the week I've got tours on, so I've juggled them onto one tour per night, spread over 4 or 5 nights. So it's just finding that right balance, really. And I'm really lucky and blessed in that my wife and kids are real supportive. I've got a real close circle of friends that are really supportive and really helpful. So I'm quite lucky, really.
You just mentioned your tour. What is your tour that you're doing?
I run a company called Amazing Old Tours, and we operate in Hull, and we use digital technology. So basically, when you're walking around the city, you can see historical pictures of how the city used to look. You can see original documents, you can see newspaper clippings. And this week I've got a World War II tour, a true crime tour, a city centre ghost tour, and an Old Town ghost walk as well. So I've got 4 tours on this week.
Oh, wow.
So,
do you do anything online at all? Obviously, I know, like with tours and things, do you ever do ghost walks, not ghost walks, but do walks and do tours and do any lives or anything like that anywhere? That obviously people are paying on the tours.
Yeah, I mean, I've done in the past. I used to work with a crew called Urban Legends years ago, and we did a lot of podcasting where we basically did like the audio version of where we'd talk about the different locations and the history and the stories behind them and things like that. And I've also worked recently with a group called The Layman, who are local lads from Hull, and they're kind of an audio-visual media organisation, and I took them out on ghost walks in the middle of the night in the pouring rain and took them to locations. We've had some fun, and they've broadcast a lot of their stuff online. So yeah, I mean, a lot of stuff with third parties, but as for myself, I'm usually too busy writing to really concentrate on anything else like that. So
okay, John's put a request in, and I'll be in trouble if I don't ask you. He knows where I live. No, I'm joking. He's part of our team as well, so I better include his question. He says, your book on Frederick Bailey Deeming was another interesting read. A lot of people won't know about this. Could you quickly talk about this, please?
Yeah, sure. I learnt about Deeming when I was a kid. I'd read a book that said this guy was a murderer and he'd briefly visited Hull. And I wanted to know more, and I started researching him, and I basically got in touch with the Australian authorities who sent me all the files on him. The National Archives sent files, the local archives had files, and the East Riding Archives had files. And then I gathered newspaper clippings, and basically this man was, the best way to describe it was, he was one man who had one wife, and to that one wife he had 4 kids. Then he met wife number 2 and married her bigamously. And while he was married to her, he robbed a jewellery shop. So he fled the country, he was arrested, brought back to Hull, and he spent 9 months in Hull prison. While he was in Hull prison, wife number 2 found out about wife number 1 and she left him. When he came out of prison, the girl was found murdered with a throat cut and she was buried. He then went up to Rainhill and rented a house out and told everyone his sister and her kids was coming to visit. He concreted the floors of the house and married wife number 3. He then had a party at the house, then left for Australia, where he met a new lady. And then in Australia, the floor cracked, and they opened up the floor and they found wife number 3, and her throat had been cut and items had been stolen from her. And they traced her back to Rainhill. So they went back to Rainhill, ripped open the floor, and they found wife number 1 and the 4 kids all murdered. So this guy was notorious, you know, he was a criminal, he was a con man, he was a fraudster, he was a bigamist. So I started researching Deeming, well, over a decade ago now, and put together kind of a dossier of his travels based on the historical primary sources, where he was, what he was doing. At one point, he was accused of being Jack the Ripper. At one point, he claimed he was a lunatic. His own brother actually stood up in the Australian courts, swore on a Bible and said he's lying. And eventually Deeming was found guilty and he was hanged in Old Melbourne Jail on 23rd of May, 1892. And he was buried next to Ned Kelly. And just, he was such a fascinating character. He'd done so many weird and wonderful and dark and devious things. And I remember when I wrote the book, the book was well received. I had an offer from Hollywood to turn it into a movie. I remember one lady read it, and she contacted me and said he was the most evilest person I've ever read about. And she refuses to leave the book in her house. She locked it in a shed at the bottom of a garden. So it was fascinating character, but really, really, really dark. That as well, I got in touch. I was in contact with his relatives. I was chatting to his relatives in Australia and New Zealand and all over the world. And yeah, fascinating case to work on. Really, really interesting. But one hell of a character.
Wow. Sorry if I sat with my mouth open, people. I forget I'm on camera sometimes. I was just shocked at the things you were saying. That's just, I don't know, that's literally just, wow. That's madness.
It was quite a dark story. I mean, imagine researching that. Imagine every day you sat in the archives reading autopsy reports on his kids, and it was awful, really awful. But I felt the story needed to be told and needed to be told properly. There were previous books that had been written about Demon, but they were based on kind of research that was done in the Penny Dreadfuls, and they wasn't historically accurate. He had this sort of mythology around him, and I wanted to get to the bare bones of the man and research him through the archives, really.
That's the difference with you, though, isn't it? Because of you being a historian, it's completely different with you, because you will go in and you do the bare bones of the research, and you literally go full bore into everything and leave like no stone unturned, as if to say then, to get all the correct information. You don't go into it lighthearted. You're full on into it and make sure you cover everything you possibly can. With other people, whereas, no disrespect to anyone out there, don't get me wrong, I'm not disrespecting anyone, but with you literally really do go into your research, and it is solid information that you go into and you look for to write about. It's not fictional. You do actually do all your research, and you go head on into everything that you do, which I think is an amazing thing to do, and to be like that.
Yeah, thank you. And what I like to do as well is I like to leave it sort of open-ended. On my tours, I leave it open-ended. I let people decide, because I can't prove that ghosts exist or they don't exist. I can't prove that UFOs exist or they don't exist. What I can say is, here's the evidence, go away and decide for yourself. And that's what I like to do. I like to present the facts and let people walk away with that and make up their own mind. And a prime example of that was 39 Degree Street. When that house first came on the scene, people were saying it was the most haunted house in Britain. They were saying that there was deaths and murders and suicides, and it was a funeral parlour, it was a morgue, it was a mortuary, it was a hostel, 20 kids were killed in there, and all this kind of stuff. And I remember when I first heard about this, the gentleman that was doing a paranormal night there said, "We've tried to research it and we can't." And I got the address and went to the archives, and within 2 days I built up a timeline using the census and the Burgess roll, the electoral roll, the trade directory, the post office directory. I had a full list of everyone that lived and worked in that property.
Wow.
And it was never a funeral parlour, it was never a morgue, it was never a mortuary. Then people started changing the goalpost and saying, well, next door was. Well, it wasn't, because I've researched that property as well from when it was first built. And, and I found all this information. One of the stories I was fascinated by, the previous owner who lived in there was said to have been dragged from the bed by an unseen hand and held up against the wall. They called the police, and the police turned up and fled the property because of the paranormal activity. So I contacted the previous owner. I found her name through the electoral roll, contacted her on social media, and I basically messaged her and said, have you got a minute to talk about 39 Degree Street? And her first response to me was, it's all a load of rubbish. And I interviewed her, and she said, basically, we lived there for 15 years. We never had any paranormal activity. I was never pulled from the bed. I was never held up against the wall. And I certainly never rang the police. So then I contacted Humberside Police and sent in a Freedom of Information request. And that is like a legal document. They've got to reply to that. And they basically sent a response back saying, we've never been called to this property. So it kind of debunked all these weird and wonderful stories.
I'm sure I've read that somewhere.
Yeah, well, I posted an article in Haunted Magazine about that.
Somewhere. It's probably where, obviously, I read all of those.
And I've spoke about it on lectures, and I filmed a an online video called Ouija Dicing With Death with Paranormal Truth, and I talked about it there.
You can still access that, can't you? A lot of the things you've done, you can still access.
Yes.
On YouTube, just so
people.
Ouija
Dicing With Death is available on YouTube. Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen that. Is there anything you'd like to promote whilst you're here? Where can people find you? How can they find out more information about you before we go?
Well, they can find me on social media. If you look for Mike Covell on Facebook or Twitter. Alternatively, Amazing Hull Tours is on Facebook. There's a big page. I do a lot of exclusive articles on there. Alternatively, on Amazon, if you just put Mike Covell into the search bar, you'll find all the books. We do have special offers on the Kindle ones occasionally, so they drop down to like 99p. So you can download them into your Kindle.
That was the next thing I was going to ask, because Melanie's just commented saying that she'd love to read some of your books. So that was next thing I was going to say to you. Where can people find them? Amazon
is the cheapest place. I actually found on my wife found it actually. She was on eBay. She found a copy of my Frederick Bailey Demon book, and it was selling for nearly £1,000. And the seller was saying that it had been signed by myself, and I'd never signed that book. When I signed them, they're personalised, so they get people's names and the location and the date. So this guy was selling a book that it totally inflated the price on, and then to really be cheeky, he put a fake signature in. But yeah, Amazon is the cheapest place, and like I said, they do deals on the Kindle versions all the time.
Okay, that's fantastic. Thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you to all the people that have commented. It's very much appreciated you getting involved. Can I please ask you to put in the comments any links where people can find you, your page, and so on? Because I'm sure that a lot of people, all the people that have been commenting, obviously are interested. So I'd love them to be able to contact you or be able to find your books or find your page and so on. So if you could do that, I'd really appreciate it if you could do that for us, please.
Will do.
Okay. I want to say thank you to everybody. Thank you for joining me. My next guest is Chris Nuara. We are discussing the Hinsdale House poltergeist, which I'm interested to find out more about. I'll say goodbye from me for now. Thank you very much, Mike. And thank you everyone for watching, and I'll see you all shortly.